Hey there, I'm Brad Barton of the 1.21 Geekawatts podcast. We're here at the Garden Sate Comic Fest. If my math is correct, it's been roughly 50 years since DC Comics introduced the world to writer Marv Wolfman, a man who has become a legend in the field. If you've somehow missed reading his work, which includes series-defining runs on New Teen Titans, Tomb of Dracula, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and so many more, then you've got a significant hole in your comic book reading experience. Marv, it is a legitimate pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much.
You've created or co-created so many characters that have become massively popular in comics, but also, of course, have had a significant presence on screens large and small. For example, the Teen Titans are everywhere right now. When you hear that a character that you've created, whether we're talking about, Cyborg or Starfire, or Raven, whoever, when you hear that a character that you've created is being adapted for TV or film, what goes through your head? Do you feel excited, or do you feel actually a little nervous, like, oh, don't mess this up, please?
No, I'm usually excited about it because they're taking a character, they're obviously intending to use that character in some fashion. They may make changes, but if they keep to the spirit of the character, that's great. But, my job was to do comics.
Yes.
And if a TV producer, an animation, or a movie producer, or somebody else wants to come in and do the movies, you just hope that what they do is good. But we really don't expect to have a lot of say in it, because I may have created it, but I don't own it. Either Marvel does, or DC, or someone else does. So you just hope that they do a good job, and you're always excited because it means somebody else cared about your work.
That's a great way of putting it, and I agree. It's certainly, it doesn't detract from what you did, what you brought to it.
My books are still out there. Almost every one has been reprinted in hardcover, or is part of the way through the reprinting in hardcover. So all my stuff is there, and that doesn't take away anything. You just want everyone to continue to like them, so you hope that people do a good job, and so far I've been very, very lucky.
Sure. I think that is sort of certainly the healthiest approach to it, and I believe I've heard the Alan Moores of the world and Neil Gaimans of the world say, hey, they can make what they want to make. I still stand by what I made, and that's wonderful. That said, do you have opinions of how your characters have been translated onto film and TV? If for no other reason, because there's been live action, there's been animation, different animation styles. Knowing especially that Teen Titans is going to hit movie screens in such a short amount of time, is that an iteration that you enjoy of them?
I like the Teen Titans Go TV show, and I've seen the movie. But I like the Teen Titans cartoon show. It's hysterically funny. In its own way, the characters are close to what we did, though the storylines and the concepts are totally made up. But what it does is, since the Teen Titans was created for teens and up, originally, it's allowing a lot of young kids to come into its mythology, and it's incredibly popular with young kids. I have nothing to do with the show, so one way or the other, it doesn't matter to me. But they do such a fun job that kids love those characters, and hopefully they will continue to love them and then pick up the comics, and certainly pick up my old comics, because they're, as I say, they've all been reprinted.
Absolutely. Many of your partnerships with specific artists have resulted in legendary runs for those certain characters. You work with George Perez, of course, on New Teen Titans and Crisis. Gene Colan on Tomb of Dracula, for example. In your opinion, what makes for a really constructive and successful writer-artist combination?
It's hard to say, because Gene and George, though absolute masters, two of the best artists ever in the history of comics. But despite the fact that that's the one similarity, we handle the projects very, very differently. With Gene, I presented 10-page plots, broken down page by page, because that's how we did everything back then. Most people just did 1 or 2 pages, but I wrote every single action down, and Gene pretty much followed it and did magnificent work. Utterly unbelievable work. But he didn't change the story. He just told the story that I sent to him on a plot. With George, I'd come up with the idea for the story, but then the two of us would get together. So I don't know what makes a great team outside of the fact that we both work together well, and we understand each other, and we understand what the project's about, And in my mind, and I believe in both of their minds too, certainly George, because I talked to him about it, the fact that we were on the same wavelength for the characters, that was all that's important. It's not about us, it's about making the book the best it can be. So Gene and I thoroughly understood what we were, the world of Dracula that we were presenting. George and I fully understood the world of the Teen Titans or Crisis on Infinite Earths or any of the other stuff we did together. So even though George was a co-creator and a co-partner in it, and Gene was the incredible artist on it, on Tomb of Dracula, they were so dissimilar otherwise.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Stylistically, yeah, it's a dramatic difference between the two. But I know that the final result was so fruitful, it was hard not to be a big fan.
It's about the book. It's not about us. And fortunately, in both those cases, and in other cases as well, we were, as I say, on the same wavelength.
Right. I know that you've talked about this before, but I can't resist asking you a little bit about how Crisis on Infinite Earths came to be. I'm guessing that there had to have been an editorial edict to try to consolidate and make sense of 50 years of continuity. Yeah.
You would guess that, but you'd be completely wrong.
Wow. All right.
I was writing Green Lantern at the time, and a fan wrote in saying that the DC continuity was very confusing, and I answered that one day we need to fix this. And that day I was heading to a convention. I spent time just sitting there thinking about things and came up with the Crisis. Then I pitched it to them. So Crisis was not an internal project. It wasn't something that they came up with and then looked at me to be the writer. This was a project that I came up with and pitched it to them and convinced them to do it. I've always written that. You can see the very first issue of Crisis in 1985, and I wrote the inside front cover, and I mentioned the whole story there too. So this was a pitch by me to the powers that be at DC, and they loved the idea.
Did it require any finagling in a way? I mean, this is a cast literally of thousands in a way, with some massively dramatic shifts, and even that is an understatement of what happened in that series. Did you ever have to twist their arm a little bit to say, like, here's what I want to do with Supergirl, just hear me out?
Well, in the case of Supergirl, she was on our list, and I never expected they'd actually agree with it, but I put it on the list because there was a movie coming out.
Sure. Right.
I put it on the list because because it was vital to me. The thing if we were going to change the universe, Superman had to be the sole survivor of Krypton. In the future, maybe there'd be a new Supergirl. So I never thought that they'd never bring back Supergirl.
Sure.
But the idea was to create it correctly and not make all the mistakes that they had made with Supergirl, because the book wasn't being followed, had very poor readership. I love the character, but unfortunately she was not a fan favorite until after she was dead. So.
Oh, the indignity.
Yeah. So with Supergirl, it was just a matter of presenting it, and amazingly DC agreeing with the reason I put her on.
Sure.
The biggest problem was working with other writers who didn't want any of their characters touched, but we had to make certain hard decisions, and we had to get them on board.
Well, that, needless to say, was a tremendous series, and as a kid growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, was seismic to my collection at that time. Some of my first exposure to your work was through the New Teen Titans drug awareness issues, actually. For what it's worth, they made a serious impression on me, so mission accomplished.
I've heard that from a lot of people, and I'm always grateful to hear that. Because that's what we were hoping for.
Yeah. How do assignments like that come across a writer's desk? Is that something that originates with you, or does that come from editorial? Like, hey, does anyone want this? And
no. Again, you're wrong.
You're not the first to say it. Happens pretty frequently. My wife can attest.
The FBI went to DC to get Superman to be the character in this anti-drug book series of books, because we were doing it for the 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade. I guess we didn't care if they were drug-addled 4th graders, I don't know, but 3rd, 5th, and 6th.
Sure.
And Jeanette Kahn, who was the publisher at the time, said, we could do Superman, but we have this other group that's incredibly popular called the Teen Titans, and that's closer in age to the kids, and we think that would be better. And the FBI went, okay, fine, that's fine. And because I was the writer of the Teen Titans comic, they asked me if I'd like to do it, and I said yes, and the rest was history.
Amazing. You're currently writing Cyborg for DC?
Raven, yeah.
Right, okay. Do you have a preference between writing for characters that have a deep personal connection with you or in your history, or you prefer diving into characters that you've not really touched before?
I like characters of all sorts, so it doesn't matter to me which one I'm writing, as long as I have the freedom to play with it. So characters like Cyborg or Raven, I would have a lot of ability to play with since I created them. But I love writing Superman. I mean, he was always my favorite character, and I love the character, and I love writing him. So in a way, and Green Lantern, and at Marvel, Spider-Man, and Fantastic Four, and all of those. I like doing both, but I like to have that ability to control the story.
Yeah. Well, again, in conclusion, even as I just look at the images on your table, I am seeing many, many of the happiest memories of my childhood, and I'm so grateful for that, and thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.